Welcome to Politics and Plastic. My name is Jim Vessel, brought to you by Duplicity Paint Studio, which is also run by me. Today I am joined by local tournament legend, tournament organizer legend, Dan Miner. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm good.
So, for those of you that are tuning in, that probably don't know Dan because he's not a name on the competitive scene, or he's a fairly quiet guy. I have known Dan, and I think I mentioned this on one of the previous shows when I was talking about this episode, but I think I've known Dan probably for at least 20 years in the hobby. I think I probably was like 13 or 14 years old when I met you. And I remember going to probably my very first tournament with you. It was either the OFCC and so the Order Fanaticus Club Challenge in um, Vancouver, or maybe like the Vancouver GT, one of the very first Vancouver GTs. I think maybe I met you and the old WCP crew. But Dan, tell us a little bit about your I guess history. I know you are a big TO in the Pacific Northwest region, and you help and support not only your own event, but you also help and support lots of other local events, whether it's through helping TO or anything like that. So you're kind of, for me, you're one of those like guys that like doesn't get enough recognition for the work you do. So tell me a little bit about the work that you've done and the events that you help with, and how long you've been kind of in the game here.
Okay. Well, we actually, I think, first met at the Vancouver GT, and we went down to the Seattle GT together, and that was the first thing. Me, you, Mark. That was I remember your cute little picture on your immigration card because it's your kid picture, right? So, anyway, I've been TOing for probably over 20 years now, I think, because I think I started around 2001. I was inspired by the first Vancouver GT I went to, and just the grandness of it. And I kind of always liked to kind of copy that, and I wanted a little bit more of it. So we just ended up starting it way back when to run just an extra fantasy event because at the time that was my main game was fantasy. It wasn't 40K. And it just kind of grew from there. Like I kept running fantasy for probably a good 6, 7 years, and then somebody else from a club, I think it was Chris Jones, approached me to try and add 40K to the event, and it kind of just went from there. And it's now I currently I TO 40K for Attack X. I go over and run events for Jen over at Kippers, and I organize and run uh, the old T-shift event, which is now called the Cascadia Championship, Wet Coast GT, and I also organize and run Cruisehammer.
Right. So, and we're going to talk about
So,
Cruisehammer because I definitely want everyone to know about Cruisehammer. But so just for those of you following at home, you run basically help run Cascadia, which is one of the larger GTs. What's it called? Sorry,
Cascadia
Cascadia
Championship.
Championships, which is one of the larger GTs in Bellevue, Washington, in the U.S. Wet Coast GT,
Mhm.
which is in Vancouver. Help and organize run Attack X, which is another one of the larger majors. Help and run Kippers Melee, which is another one of the larger majors. And then what one am I missing? And
Cruisehammer.
Cruisehammer. So basically, Dan, if you go to a GT or major in the Pacific Northwest, there's a very good chance that Dan Miner is involved. And then on top of that, you've been involved with Cruisehammer. So tell us a little bit about Cruisehammer, because I think some people have probably heard of it, but not everyone knows I mean, what it is.
Well, it's a novel idea. Basically, we play war games on a cruise ship. Board games, war games, you name it.
Oh, I just lost you down for a sec.
Parts
Sorry,
is
Dan, I just lost you for a
the
sec. Can
hanging
you?
at the hangouts.
I
The
heard
hang. Oh,
we play
hello.
games on a cruise ship.
No problem.
That was where I lost you. So just give
Yes.
me another
Okay.
shot there.
So no problem. Um, it's just the my favorite part of tournaments is the hangout, right? When you're kind of getting there, you're talking about games, you're having drinks with your buddies, and the Cruise Hammer experience is that over a 7 day span. And the beauty of it also is that when the whole premise is that there's always cruise days on cruises where you're traveling from one destination to another. And with this, we actually organize and plan the events over those cruise days. So when we're in port in, let's say, Jamaica or Mexico, you're expected to go out and enjoy those places. You're not going to be stuck in playing games. So it's kind of gets the extra experience of making it also a holiday, which is why we call it the most spouse friendly event going. So
Right. And I'm going, so I won a ticket, and you guys give away tickets for Cruisehammer at various events in the Pacific Northwest. So I think I won
that's
a
right.
Cruisehammer ticket for winning the last T-shift major in 2019, but sorry, Cascading
Yep.
Championships. But obviously, the Cruisehammer that we were supposed to have last year got canceled, and then got pushed to this year, got canceled. So when is the next Cruisehammer going to happen?
Oh, that's a you caught me a bit off guard there. It is definitely in August of next year.
Okay.
I believe it's August 12th to 19th,
Okay. And that's
if I
leaving
were
from
to guess
Texas,
off the
right?
top of my head. Galveston, Texas, yeah.
All right.
And so then we head down. We're doing Jamaica, Grand Caymans, and Cozumel, Mexico,
All right.
and then it heads back up.
So, if for those of you listening, if you guys are interested in joining me, Dan, a bunch of other goofball Canadians, I know like some great, like awesome people like Reese was on the last Cruise Hammer, I believe, in 2019. So there's actually a lot of people that go on this Cruise Hammer. It's actually a really fun event for couples and people with their spouses. And then basically you play Warhammer or board games or any kind of nerdy stuff on the boat. There's a little bit of a tournament on the boat. You get really drunk, and then you go and basically travel around the like the kind of Gulf of Mexico, basically, and that's going to be happening next August from Texas. So if you're in America and listening to this, definitely check it out. And I'll definitely put a link to the website in the show notes. So if you guys are interested in checking out more details on Cruise Hammer, make sure to check it out. And you actually organized that with one of the guys from Washington, correct?
Yeah, with Ben Schmuller.
Ben Schmaller, and he's quite well known in the Pacific Northwest as well as a kind of a TO organizer as well. So, all right, so let's get into the main topic, and this is something that is actually really, uh, I feel like it's not talked about enough, and what that is that the cost of tournaments, not just what they cost from a, I guess, time perspective, right? So the things that we really want to talk about is what is the true cost of a tournament for the TO or for the person organizing it? And then what should the costs be for players, right? Because I think there's this huge divide and a huge, I guess, um, misconception from the player's perspective as to the true cost of tournaments. And so I wanted to have you on, Dan, because of the fact you have all this experience running events, not just in Canada, but in the US and on boats, obviously. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about your experience over the last 20 years running events. And I'm sure you've had events that have gone really well. And I'm sure you've had events that have not gone so well. And obviously, as we move into kind of things reopening, both in the 2020 season, we're going to see a lot more events, both hopefully in Canada, but also in the US. We're seeing FLG Frontline Gaming do a whole host of events, right? We just saw the Warzone Atlanta announce their new event, and I think their tickets are around $200, which I actually think is probably around right, as we'll get to for the cost of the event. And that's $200 US, guys. But first, I guess I wanted to begin the conversation with just differentiating the kinds of events we're going to be talking about. So, when I think about tournaments, there's kind of two types. We have kind of the RTT size, and these would be kind of events that will say run out of an existing game store. So you're talking, maybe somewhere that might have 4 to 8 tables, or 4 to 10 tables. So like I don't know, someplace like Mox. What's that place in Seattle?
Fox Boarding House.
Mox Boarding House, or the some of the events that they ran into the garage previously. So these are kind of RTTs where the facility is already there, the tables are already there. It's kind of a permanent staple, and the cost of the event is actually probably pretty low, because the store is already existing. Now, obviously, the cost of the store is something that we're not going to really get into. That's a whole thing, but I don't really want to talk about those events because those kinds of events I feel like are not, those little RTT size or even sometimes GTs at stores. Like I know there's the store in Portland, Oregon. I believe it's called, oh, what's it called? I've been there a bunch of times.
Guardian Games.
Guardian Games. Yeah, Guardian Games is a
Guardian
huge
Games.
huge amount of space, and I've actually gone to a GT there, GT level game there. And they have a great venue there as well with lots of tables. It's a huge space, but that's not the kind of event I want to talk about, and that's not, I think, what we're going to be talking about mostly. the kinds of events that I want to talk about are events where a TO, so someone independent of like a game store, goes and organizes an event in a venue that they have to rent, and has to sell tickets to pay for the cost of the venue and bring in and set up tables and all that kind of stuff. So those are the kinds of events we're going to talk about. I don't really want to talk about the kinds of events that happen inside existing game stores, because those stores kind of, a lot of those costs are kind of baked into the operating of the store. And so that doesn't really, I don't think it's super applicable for this conversation. There are costs obviously for those, and those are their own kind of thing. But so let's talk about that second kind of event. So, Dan, what are some, I guess, let's start with like, what are some big misconceptions about these events? Like, what do you think some of the most common misconceptions are that people have about the running of these events?
Well, I think people end up missing the whole concept of just how much venue costs are. Because the majority of events that we run, like because it's well, until recently, a 4 foot by 6 foot table. Although let's be honest, most TOs are keeping with the 4 by 6, just to give players a little bit of space to throw dead guys and stuff on. It requires a lot of square footage. You're looking at that point roughly an 8 by 8 area to have two people play a game. So 64 square feet multiplied by, the half the number of players involved, you're talking about thousands and thousands of square feet. So like we're typically booking 5,000 plus square feet of space, and that's to run about 120 to 140 guys.
Right. And I
Uh,
think across like the states, that kind of 100 to 120 guys, that's kind of becoming a very common size of event these days, right? So something around 50 to 60 tables, and then 100 to 130 players. That's, I'd say that's kind of the typical GT like major size these days. Obviously the super majors are their own thing, but let's talk about kind of that size of event. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, no problem. So, so the first thing you're going to look at is that you're going to see probably around, in our region, anyways, and also in Bellevue. So, from the major centers, you're looking at around $6,000 to $8,000 to be able to book that kind of space, which I think is a lot higher than what a lot of listeners probably think that is. And then you've got to couple into the fact that, like, if you're going to run a 120 person worth of event, you've got to have 60 tables worth of terrain. And terrain is not cheap. Even if you're like going back to the old London GT a couple of years ago when they had the foam squares, basically the foam blocks.
Which we don't
Even
want
if
to
you're
do.
looking at,
Infamous
no,
foam blocks.
but if you're going to do that, that's still probably about $40 to $50 a table to basically even do something that looks that bad. So for us, because I run multiple events, we invested in a laser cutter and we've been designing building basically sets to go. But that's still also, even if I'm doing them at cost, which means I'm giving my time away for free, I'm still doing tables worth of terrain for about $60 to $70 a set. So if you're looking at 60 tables, like that's already $3,000. And the problem there is that as the game changes and evolves, the amount of terrain and the types of terrain have changed. So some of the stuff that actually was good in or okay in eighth is actually not that viable in ninth and kind of has to be restructured or abandoned. So that actually makes that kind of cost in building. All
Oh, I just lost you, Dan.
uh, over events.
Sorry, Dan, I just lost
Oh,
you for a sec. You said the
where
cost.
did where did
You
you?
said the cost of it makes. You're saying that the cost of that terrain, it has to change, and then you're about to say, you said something else. You kind of froze on me.
Oh, okay. Trying to get back to where I was thinking. And you end up having to refresh stuff because stuff gets broken. People are using it and abusing it, and not necessarily like intentionally breaking stuff, but over the course of a tournament, you could be leaning over the table and then something breaks or snaps, and
Right.
I'm not even including any of the paint that's required to paint all this stuff, nor the labor
Right.
for any of this stuff. So.
And that's okay. And so let's just break that down again for everyone. So we have a space that's costing $6,000 to $7,000 Canadian or US, obviously depending. We have 50 to 60 tables worth of terrain, around $60 to $70 just in terrain. We all now expect game mats, right? So right now, for me to buy an FLG game mat costs around $100 US. You could probably get them in bulk for slightly cheaper if you kind of ring them up, but retail you're talking around $100 per table per mat, because guess what? Players demand neoprene mats now. That's the standard. On top of that, potentially you might need to actually rent tables, because not every venue is going to provide you with enough 4x8 or 6x4 tables to actually have your table. So you might be renting tables on top of that. Okay. And then what else? What other costs are going into this event?
Well, then there's also like there's like we'll typically do swag, trophies. Those all have to be purchased. Far. If you've got a website, which we do, that has an e-commerce setup, that also has to be paid for, which involves domain registrations, et cetera, et cetera. So, like my budget for the 2019 event when we ran it, expenses wise, I was running at almost $11,000 in expenses.
Right. And then on top of that, players these days, especially, sometimes they're expecting good prize support. I think that's something that now how those prizes are awarded. I mean, we can talk about that as a whole. That's a whole subject, because I know, um, very like famously, most of the events that Dan runs, we don't actually do prizes for first, second, third. All the prizes are raffled off, which I actually think is a great way for everyone to just get involved. And usually there's lots of prizes. It just means that it's not this like cutthroat thing, but the prizes get raffled off. And then usually there's trophies or laser etched plaques for the first and second and third. We're also talking, what about things like software? Like, is there any cost for, say, TO software for BCP, for TOs to use that?
There is a little bit if you're if so it's free. Let's be honest. If you don't sell your tickets through the site, the advantage of selling the tickets through the site is that there everybody comes pre-registered to the event, which is a way less work for me. But actually, that one's not that bad because typically I would normally be using PayPal, which is taking 3% off the top, anyways. BCP is actually, I think, 4%, so it's actually it's pretty fair.
Right.
It's pretty fairly priced,
And then,
but that is taking that off of all ticket sales,
right.
right? So
And then that kind of segues into a really good, and here's the thing, and this is the thing that I've really started to see. If tournaments these days, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Dan, that the reputation of tournaments these days is like you it's make or break on the quality of the tables and the terrain and the venue and the execution of the event. So players, especially in this day of social media, the bar for like what players expect at a tournament, it's so much higher in 2020 2021 than it was, say, 10 years ago. Like, there was tournaments that I would go to. People now expect air conditioned rooms. They expect meals or good meal service. They expect lots of space. They expect perfect terrain with adequate terrain on every table, right? And anything less than that, what happens? You get put on social media. You end up on some 40K groups, basically getting ragged on. It becomes a Twitter thing where everyone's just basically, you end up on all sorts of shows like mine where we just basically make fun of you. So the expectation from the players has only gotten higher, right? As the events have gone on. And the other thing that we don't talk about is your time, Dan. So Dan, you have a full-time job, you have a family. How many hours do you think you personally spend to, say, run an average major that doesn't actually come back to you in the form of like an hourly wage? Like, how many hours between building terrain, assembling terrain, renting the space, making flyers, advertising, setting up the space, breaking down the space, all of that stuff? How much time do you think on average you would invest in, say, something like the West Coast GT?
it's at least 1,000.
1,000 hours?
Yeah, it's at least 1,000.
Right.
Well, but that's over the. I'd say that's over the 3 events that I run a year.
Okay, so if you get a
But
thousand
even so,
hours,
like
I want everyone to kind of think about 1,000 hours, how much time that is for an average TO over the course of, and that might not be average. Some TOs might be able to get away with slightly less, especially if they're just ordering terrain that's pre-built, pre-painted. But between building, assembling, painting terrain, that is a lot. That is a lot of time. That is a hell of a lot of time. So, and what are the risks, Dan? What are the risks for you if, say, for instance, say for instance the next tournament, which I think you're going to be helping out with, is Attack X, hopefully
Yep.
um, in October,
September.
I believe.
September.
So that's going to be up in Kelowna or Kamloops. I always get it mixed up.
Kamloops.
Kamloops, BC in
Kamloops.
October. So hopefully that's our first event in BC. But like, that's not even really your event. That's an event that you help out with and that you do.
Right.
So like, you still at least have someone else that's doing a lot of the event. But how much, like, for that event alone, um, how much time or how much risk is there for the TO or for the next wet coast, which I hope we have next year? If, for instance, say you don't hit your minimum ticket sold.
So Attack X is a bad example because that one I just literally run it for him. But I will talk about it for Wet Coast, which is one that I do organize. There's huge risk. So the majority of hotel contracts, I was talking to somebody who actually said they could cancel their venue with no penalty within 2 weeks of a start date. So if it didn't reach the fill capacity, it would just cancel. I'm like, wow, I've never that's like the holy grail for me. That does not exist. So like for the majority of contracts that we're talking about, if I were to cancel a month before the event, I would be on the hook for the full venue cost. So at that point, that would be that $6,000 to $7,000. So it's a significant amount of risk. So for me, what I end up having to do is I have to price my ticket sales based upon a fill of about 60%, and that gives me some wiggle room. But I'm also trying to book spaces relative around what I have a good indication that will come. Like let's say last Wet Coast, I was able to sell. I think we did 96 tickets. The idea is that I would use that 96 tickets. I would probably scale it back a bit. About 80 tickets would be my break even point that I'd be shooting for.
Right.
So, and then you price stuff out based on that. And you kind of have to, right? And then if I sell extra tickets, a lot of that ends up going back in swag. I will fully admit that, when the years are good, I do take some money, but I feel that the amount of hours I put in, that I'm not taking an unreasonable amount. I'd
Well,
probably say my
let's
labor cost, like I imagine I'm paying myself around $2 an hour when I do.
well,
So,
okay, let's actually stop there, Dan, because I actually think this is a really important point, and it's something that actually really bothers me about the mentality around tournaments. So when I go to say a 40K tournament, I'm gonna play, let's say 5 or 6 games. Okay, so we're talking about a minimum of 15 hours of entertainment, plus obviously like, so 15 hours of entertainment, right? Why do you think there's this mentality? And I think this is actually a really wrong mentality, that for some reason the TOs should actually not make money. Because from the way I see it, the TOs should be making money, not just a little bit, but like enough that it feels like it was worth it. And again, there's no amount, given that you're going to be putting hundreds of hours in, thousands even sometimes, plus all your time and effort. There's probably no amount, unless you're making like 10 grand, where you're going to feel like, oh, this was worth my time. But why do you think, you even hesitated to say that? So why do you think there's this mentality that TOs should not make money? Because I actually think it's a really, really bad mentality that players have, that they think that TOs are some sort of like altruistic, group of people that should just be volunteering hundreds and hundreds of hours of their time, energy, and effort for as a charity for the players to deal with all of their complaints, all of their whining, all of their whatever, all of that work, right, for very little reward. Why do you think there's this attitude that TOs shouldn't make money? Because I actually think the opposite. I think ticket prices should go up. I think TOs should get compensated for the time that they invest, and that players should really start to understand the true cost of these events. And if that means that I only go to half as many events because I can't afford as many, well then that's the result. But I just think there's something very ethically and morally wrong about this idea that TOs should just basically be slave labor towards the players, and basically be slaves, essentially labor slaves, to run these events for players for absolutely no reward outside of like good feelings, right? Like that for me just sits very wrong. So why do you think that attitude exists? And like, yeah, where do you think that comes from?
well, I think it's that it's funny because we actually I think it's oddly enough, I think it stems from how expensive the hobby is to begin with. And people have already invested like $2,000, $3,000, sometimes even more on these armies, and they don't have a lot of extra dollars to give. Which and couple that with the fact that now, especially, there's a lot of events out there, and there's a lot of saturation in the market, so competition becomes a thing, right? So now, I think we talked about a little bit off the air before we came on about how the expectation on prizes has gotten higher and higher and higher, and it's escalating. And I think ticket prices are going to have to adjust, especially like certain events that are running with big cash prizes. They have to charge those big ticket prices to be able to do so. So um, there's going to be, it's a balancing act, and the problem comes in is like, yeah, I definitely undervalue my time, but then I know that other people already do undervalue my time to begin with. So I find myself having to keep my ticket prices a bit on the low side, to get the minimum numbers that I need.
Right. And
So,
I guess one of the things I would ask is like, how do we change that mentality? Because for me, I actually am like, as I said, like, yeah, I'm gonna sit here maybe and sound privileged. Like Jim, who is, he's got his, a good paying job and can afford the hobby. He's saying, let's have more expensive tournament pricing. And I'm gonna say it in a way that, oh, I'm gatekeeping. People's gonna accuse me of gatekeeping because I don't want poor people playing in tournaments. That's what people are gonna accuse me of. But I actually, the way I look at it is, I want it to feel like, well, I want more tournaments, like, and I want more people to actually look at running a tournament and say, hey, that's actually something that's cool and that I would like to do that. But Dan, I'll be honest, when I look at the amount of work you put I'm like, never in a million years would I do that. Not a million years. And there's probably thousands of players like me that look at the amount of time and effort you put in and say, wow, Dan is literally maxing his credit card. He's got to take on all this risk, all this physical work, all this organization for what? Like, the good feeling that he's done something for the community. And look, there might be people out there that are like super altruistic and they're super like, they just really really love that. And hey, for those people, God bless. I don't have anything wrong with that. And maybe you're one of those people, Dan. But there's something that I really feel like I want our TOs to feel like they're compensated for the time and effort that they put in. So what do you think is going to be the solution to getting players' attitudes to change? Because you mentioned you had to keep your tickets low, but right now, I mean, how much do you charge for Wet Coast? Around $100, I think.
so last year was well, the last time we ran it, it was $70.
Right. So for $70 seems cheap to me for that. Like for me, like 100 to 120 to $50 is like the minimum for, especially for a GT with all those things you mentioned. So a venue, good tables, good terrain. Now, if I'm going to be paying say 60, $70 or $50, then I expect the event to reflect that cost. But when you're running the kind of a major event, so 100 plus players, big tables, big venue, I don't think it's for 15 hours of entertainment. What else can you do for $120 for 15 hours? A movie ticket is 2.5 hours and it costs $30 just to like walk in the door, right? And that's a 2 hour movie. So why is it? And I guess like what I'm trying to figure out is like, how do we change players' attitude? Because it seems like there needs to be a change here to make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think maybe awareness on like shows like this one may help adjust attitudes like that. Um, my wife jokes all the time that I've got like sucker tattooed on my forehead, that I just can't see it when I look in the mirror. Because yeah, I definitely use up my fair share of time on hobby stuff like this. So um, yeah, and I would certainly, I'm not saying I would mind getting a little more few dollars out of it, but
Right.
then I also like the enjoyment and the players as well too. So
Right.
it's one of those things. So
Absolutely. And so, okay, so do you think that maybe like right now, like you kind of went through a little bit of your finances, but generally TOs are very private with a lot of the finances. Like it's not something that you generally see out front, right? Like you don't see TOs being like, one of the things I actually really like with the WTC and the process for the bidding of the WTC is that teams put in their bids to run the WTC every year. And in that bid document is literally a financial breakdown of estimated ticket sales, how much the tables are going to cost, how much the train is going to cost, venue cost, meal cost, all those kinds of things are broken down. Judges, especially if they're flying out judges, which is something we're going to talk into as is paid judges. So they do a full breakdown. And then based on that, they say, okay, so based on our estimate of 60 players, here's our breakdown, everyone to see. We want to bid for the WTC, and that means tickets are going to cost X dollars. So do you think that's something that TO should start doing more of, which is being upfront and transparent with the costs of actually running the event right out of the gate and say, hey guys, here's the document that justifies and shows this ticket price, right? Do you think that's something that people should be doing more? Because I kind of feel like a lot of TOs are very like hesitant to like reveal that information.
Um, so it's hard to say because I'll tell you, there's from region to region, venue costs are vastly different. Terrain costs are going to be vastly different, and I guess what it comes down to for TOs and why most of them are probably pretty closed about it is, you know, they don't really want criticism on I get enough criticism on the way that my rules are structured, the way my tables are set up, the do I provide food? Is there a bar on site? There's criticism from all the places. And and in fact, actually, the constant criticism, is probably my least favorite part about being a TO. And I think a lot of TOs will just not want to have yet another point of criticism.
Right. So just there's a few questions in the chat which I'm just gonna kind of throw out here, which is um Corbs 416 asks if you have to get insurance. Is that a cost that needs to be involved in any sort of large venue, or is that usually included in the venue cost, like liability
It
insurance?
it completely depends on the venue. Some of them will ask for proof of insurance, some won't. We have a tendency to tender our bids from multiple hotels. That's one way of getting costs down. And so, some of them we do have to buy insurance, some of them we don't have to buy insurance,
Right.
and then kind of go from there.
Yeah. Brian basically says what's a good price. Now, when I say guys 130 to 150, I'm talking about Canadian dollars, and $30 like to go to I live across the street from the Scotiabank Theater in Vancouver, which is like the Sony the Dolby Atmos screen. It's 20 I think it's 27.50 for one adult ticket. So it is $30 for like a ticket. Now, if I want to go to like some 2D like, peanut screen, sure, it's like $17 even on the matinee nights it's still $17. But I don't know the last time I haven't been to the theater obviously in forever. But I remember last time going to for two like adult tickets, it was like $27 each for like the 3D like Atmos or whatever, like for the newest big movie. So that's not that off. Obviously your market will vary. And yeah, like 100, I've regularly paid $100 to $120. So like the Lone Star or sorry, the Las Vegas team tournament is $100 US per person. So it's $500 for the team, which is around $140 Canadian, right? So that's actually not that far off. And also, um, when you're doing really large events like that, you do hit a slight economies of scale in certain areas. Also understanding that FLG is running that. So FLG, they make their own mats, so they don't have to buy them. They make their own terrain, so they don't have to buy it. Now they also have to move terrain and travel terrain. So what kind of costs are involved in, for instance, like you have a lot of terrain up in Vancouver for Cascadia Championships. Are you gonna have to bring down terrain and mats? How's that gonna work?
Yeah, we have a tendency to do that. Luckily enough, we've been able to handle that through caravanning. We basically have a bunch of guys that we already know is going down, and just get each of them to take portions of the stuff we need. But we do also still have like about half of our tables currently are Ben actually has that, and he rents a truck to bring them up from Portland because that's where, well, actually Bend, Oregon is
Right.
where he lives. So there's costs and logistics to that. Same thing with like Wet Coast. They're like even running it within your own city. Um, the stuff, it needs to be transported from storage to the venue. It just doesn't magically show up, which costs gas, time. Like us, usually I have to take the day off before the event and just run around managing all of the logistics of getting everything there and set up. and that kind of stuff.
And then what
So
about things like storage costs? Because I know, for instance, Nova very famously has just put up a GoFundMe basically for like $200,000 to essentially pay because they store 400 or 500 tables worth of terrain between all their systems and all their events that they run. And one of their biggest costs year to year is actually just storage. They have like I think a bunch of storage rooms in Virginia, Washington, or DC, wherever they store it, and that's actually a big cost that, whether there's an event or not, so there hasn't been an event in the last 2 years, someone's still got to pay that storage money, right? So what kind of storage costs are also added onto this for like a year?
well, I'm lucky in the fact that my partner Alex, he's a bit of a slumlord around Vancouver, so he has a bunch of storage spaces all
Right.
over the place. So we actually haven't had to pay for any storage costs up to this point. So, but that would be something, once we expand certain past a certain point, that would be something that we would have to look into. Which is part of the reason why when I designed the new terrain set that I just did, is to condense into itself so that it packs up
And
really small.
I don't know if you want to plug that or if you're worried that too many people will come and buy those train sets, but if people were interested in purchasing those train sets, where could they find them?
So minorcreations.com. Go to the 40K section of the website. It's bookshelf terrain series. It's just a gothic set now, but I'm going to be working on a Necron set next, and then kind of skinning it up to be Orky, and then maybe even Eldar after that. The idea is it's a whole ninth edition 40K set that fits in a half of a banker's box, so that I can have one banker's box be good for two tables.
Sorry, I just had a phone call. Uh, all right. Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious that there is this disconnect between the cost of events, not just in materials and in time, and ticket prices. So, what do you think? I mentioned maybe being transparent about prices. You mentioned you don't think that's a good idea. Obviously, I have a very small platform here, so I'm just one person talking about it. But do you think that um, like yeah, I'm just trying to think of solutions here, like because I personally look, do I want to pay more for tickets? No, of course. If I'd love tournaments to all be free and they just be like, we all just go to them for free. I don't like paying money, but I also want them to continue to exist. And very famously, we've seen a lot of events that have become insolvent over the years that just no longer exist anymore, right? Like I can think of at least half a dozen tournaments. Godicon in Victoria, um, these were events that is a known one. Obviously, the all the Games Workshop GTS, I'm pretty sure they stopped doing them just because they were costing too much money at one point. Um, there's been a lot of events over the years that have stopped running because the TOs were basically just like, hey, this is not worth my time. These are too expensive. I'm losing money, right? And we need to figure out a way to fix that. So, is there any things that you would like to see from the players, or you think that the players should be maybe doing, or is there any way that players should be getting involved here to help out with this, to help kind of mitigate some of that?
I actually think the biggest driver right now, and it's good for me, it's good for us, is I think Frontlines setting its ticket prices the way they are kind of sets the bar. And I get it that the problem comes in is if I'm going to charge, 150, $200 basically for people to come to an event, there is going to be an expectation attached to it. Um, but I do like the fact that their premier event is priced in a premier kind of way. It allows for more wiggle room. Like for me, I know because I'm gonna have to make up for costs of not running an event for 2 years because there's and stuff like that that have to be covered. I'm looking at probably having to go up to $100 Canadian for the next event that I run. So
Yeah, so just to give you an
which
idea,
is that's only 70 US. So
I got
like
an email.
75 US.
Yeah, just to give you an idea of kind of costs, I got an email from Warzone Atlanta a few days ago, and the tickets are going to be, I believe, let me see here. I believe they are around $200. Um, US, and that is for basically like a it's an very expensive ticket, and obviously they do big.
Excellent. So yeah, like I was
Okay.
saying, I think so because we plan on booking the big ballroom the next time, which is adding another 50% space. And I'm currently, as you're aware of, um, I'm currently farming off a bunch of buildings over to people to get a whole bunch of the new building sets ready and to go to make the event as elite as possible the next time when we're ready to run.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about other costs associated with this. So one of the big topics that has been kind of hot on the tournament scene has been judges, and not just rules judges, but also paint judges. That's something that I'm very passionate about, and I know I've talked about quite a few times. Um, and there's been a bigger and bigger kind of desire for paid judges in order to help mediate some of these events. So what kind of costs, like, you're obviously going to be running West Coast. I assume you're going to be running 40K in Age of Sigmar. Any other systems?
Yep. Probably. I've got a couple of guys who really want to have Legion there and are willing to kind of pick up the ball and run with it. So quite likely there'll be Star Wars Legion. And I also have a soft spot for Kings of War, so I might carve out some space for that as well too.
Right. Okay. And so for, let's say that's 4 game systems, and obviously, are you going to do all the training for all the systems?
I lost you for a second there. What was that?
I said, are
Say
you
again?
going to be doing the training for all the systems, or are like for Kings of War and Legion?
No, Legion, the guys there, they've got like a between 4 guys, they've got like 3D print farms going, and they've got all the really nice Legion stuff. So that they're willing to bring. So that part
Right.
won't. But yeah, for Age of Sigmar for sure, and 40K. Kings of War doesn't need a heck of a lot of terrain, so what I already have is going to be adequate for that. So
Right. So let's talk about judges. So how are you going to get, like, are you going to be doing the judging yourself? Are you going to be relying on volunteers? What is your approach as far as getting judges for these events? Because I strongly believe that, especially if we want to move 40K or some of these games into a more competitive setting, we need pro judges, or at least people that are, competent, that are high, that can play the game at a high level. And that often means potentially having to pay these players to, or people to attend and essentially judge your event. So you're talking 2 days, say for a 100 player event, you're going to probably want 2 judges, realistically, maybe one. But we're still talking, 16 to 20 hours of labor to kind of oversee this event. So what are your thoughts on also having paid judges? Is this something that just sounds totally outlandish, or what are your thoughts
it
on
is
that?
not actually. In fact, for the 2020 event, before it ended up getting canceled, I had already approached Mitch Pelham to come up and judge, and he's from the somewhere in Washington. I'm actually not entirely sure. I think he's just outside of Seattle. And I offered to put him up in a hotel room for the weekend for him and his wife. And then always for my events, I feed any of my volunteers as well too. So like I'll
Right.
do $50 vouchers per day for meals for them to go out and eat. And because if they're gonna come and help me run my event, the last thing I they should be doing is having to also pay for their own food. So
Right, but
um,
it's still
yeah,
not
so
paid judges.
oh no, it's
You're paying them with
certainly it's a far
accommodations, but
cry.
you're not paying
Yes,
them a
that
wage.
is true. That is true. Yeah, but I am not adverse to it. It would just definitely be something that I'd have to budget in because I budget everything in. So
So
um, yeah,
let's say, let's think of a theoretical scenario here where we have, for a 120-person event, we have 2 paid judges that, we'll pay them $20 an hour, right? So slightly above minimum wage in Canada. And then the TO also getting paid. Let's say, I don't know. What do you think? Like, so here's the way I look at it is, let's use restaurant margins, which is 5%. So 5% is restaurant margins, right? So for an event where maybe, let's say, 100 tickets at $100, that's a $10,000 event, right? So your margin, your 5% would be what, $500.
yeah,
So you're gonna take another $500, right? Which again is doesn't sound like a lot of money, like that.
yeah,
Like it's not like for the amount of time, but 5% is like restaurant margins, right? You do $10,000 in sales
yeah.
and you get 5%. So we're talking 5% margin of profit for the TO, maybe 10%. I think would even be fair. Uh, paid for the judges, tables, train. What do you think you'd need to charge for a 100-person event for it to actually like? What would be the real cost of that? Like, do you think like if you
That
could,
would probably be that would be about $150 per
yeah.
ticket.
So I think
And that's actually keeping the terrain slash swag budget relatively low, which is something you can do once you've gotten an established amount of terrain. I just haven't gotten there yet.
right.
So
Okay. Anything else kind of when it comes to mind when it comes to this kind of concept of the cost of tournaments? Anything else people are kind of missing?
um, I think definitely you hit on it a little bit talking about the entertainment value. I think people definitely undervalue how much of entertainment they get out of their dollars at that point. When you're talking $150, $150 for 16 hours of entertainment, you're paying less than $10 an hour. You wouldn't expect to work for $10 an hour, so I don't know how you expect to be entertained for basically that money. So that said, though, once again, it also comes down to the TO too, right? I think I have to. It's a I have to get a little more greedy. I have to basically value my time more than I currently am, and that's part of it as well.
Right. And then, the one thing, and playing devil's advocate here, um, do you think maybe doing a tiered pricing system, like, one thing I always think of, and I know this is probably like unfair, but like, I know when I was 16, I think, we mentioned we went to Vancouver GT. I don't know, it's probably like 14 or 15. If you had said, hey, Jim, at 14 or 15, pay $100 to go to GT, I would have been like, this is impossible. There's no chance. And that's one of my best memories of like my first getting into tournaments was at a fairly young age. So do you think doing even like an age like almost like when you go to like there's a kids fair and then there's an adult price for events? Do you think that would be something that could be a bit more palatable where like, if you're over 21, you pay the full price, you pay an adult ticket, and then if you're under a certain age, you pay for like a kind of a kids ticket? Because sometimes I feel like, yeah, we want to be charging the right amount, but we also don't want to price out younger players, right? Like I want some of the best memories I have is playing like round one against very young players. Not because I stomped them, but because it was such a great. I tried to make their experience as going to their first event or their first tournament just really positive and try to give them as much learning as I could and just show them that like it's not scary, it's this really fun thing. And so I want to encourage those younger players to show up at events. But what do you think we could do to kind of make sure that those kinds of players, or even players that can't necessarily afford it, um, can still attend the events, but also charging a fair price? What do you think the solution might be?
Well, that's an interesting concept. Oddly enough, I think basically just um, maybe making awareness on your site that if you can't make an event due to financial hardship, just send us a message and maybe we can find something. Like, because for those kinds of people, I love getting those kinds of people their first taste by like being a ringer or stuff like that, where they don't have to pay anything to come to the event and they can still come, participate, and enjoy themselves, but don't necessarily have to invest a heck of a lot of money in. So
Yeah, or even like maybe like some sort of, not even if it's financial hardship, but like maybe if it's someone's like first event, like almost like it's like, first one's free, right? Like first one's always free and they get you
yeah,
hooked. And then
exactly.
it's like,
Yeah.
or maybe you get a heavy discount if it's like your first tournament that you've ever been to. Like you're just getting into your brand new player. Like obviously it would be hard to like police that. I mean, it's probably honor system. But one of the things that I do want to make sure happens with tournaments is I don't want it to feel um like players can't actually attend them because they're too expensive. Like that's so there's this like push and pull between that where it's like we want to bring new players into the tournaments. We want new players to give it a shot. And if you're a new player starting at the hobby, it's already very expensive. You're spending $100 here, $100 there. To spend, another $100 on essentially no models and just to go hang out on a weekend and play games seems like a lot of money. So I
So
think
you've
that
done it
maybe,
once, anyways.
yeah, until you've done it once and you're like, oh, okay, this is great. But like, I do think actually maybe a hybrid model that encourages those new players or younger players to get into the events, and then maybe something for us old. tournament addicts that are willing to pay whatever. And are going to spend $300 on beer anyways on top of the ticket over the weekend, right? So like it's
Exactly.
like we're already like that's the thing that always surprises me is like, I'll go drop $300. Like I went to Strategies today and I bought almost $100 in just like no models. I just bought paint, some primer, some varnish. I bought like a few other small things, like some clippers. There's like $100. Like I'll do that, no problem. I don't even think about it. But then it's like $60 for a GT ticket for 15 hours of entertainment. Oh my god, like it's so much. So there's just this like huge disconnect between value perception for players.
Yeah, definitely is. So what I had done in the first couple of wet coasts that I ran is I ran feeder events. So I would go into like the local stores that were going to be my sponsors, and I would run mini tournaments and give away a ticket to Wet Coast as the prize. So, it'd be like a $10 buy-in, and if you won it all, you would basically get a free ticket to go to Wet Coast. So that kind of an idea. I'd like to play around with that idea again. I'd have to find a few more volunteers to probably be able to do it effectively because it's there's a lot of stores actually around now. So, and I wouldn't mind actually having, some places from out of town as well too. I would love to offer up tickets for that kind of a thing as well too. And I think I can certainly budget that into the advertising budget to be able to do so.
Sound sound
I think that
sounds like a prize for the BC40K League.
yeah, maybe. Sounds uh, done. Sounds good. You've heard it here first.
Yeah, so two questions from chat. So Scott Blades asks, how do you think the size of events should affect ticket prices with startup costs being so high? Yeah, Dan, has any thoughts on that?
It's the last part of that. You
Sorry,
kind of
he,
cut
he
out for a
wonders
second.
how should the size of the event affect ticket price with startup costs being so high? Because I think one thing that is an issue, and I kind of talked about this in our conversation around ELO ratings, which is the nature of the ITC right now, which is a big driver in tournament attendance, is that bigger events mean more points. And so you end up trying to, it's this kind of this like arms race of like bigger and bigger tournaments. But the problem is you end up with someone like guys at London GT where they went, they flew too close to the sun, so to speak. They got too aggressive, and then all of a sudden their tournament was a disaster. Reputation was ruined, and obviously since then they've recovered. But we want to really avoid that. So I think
Yeah.
there's the right way to do it, which is I think you should start small. Maybe it is starting out at a local store. The first I remember the tournaments you used to run at the old Legion Hall, the
Oh yeah, those were
WCP
great.
tournaments. And it's like $2 pints, and I don't know how much you pay for Legion Hall, or even the ones we have at the Eagles sometimes, which is another basically Legion Hall, and those are fairly cheap for that space. And that's like a very economic way to start that tournament. And then once you've built a reputation, and you can guarantee that 60, 70 players, then moving on. But I think a lot of players, TOs are trying to jump straight into that major size.
Well, and that becomes a big problem too. That's a good thing to talk about for fledgling TOs. If you are going to do it, definitely start small. Start either in your local stores or find like a gymnasium or a Legion Hall or something like that for sure. Especially since the larger your venue is, not only do you have to have a certain expectation to fill a certain percentage of it just to break even, but you're taking on a massive undertaking with the amount of terrain that ninth edition 40K really needs to be played effectively. At an okay level. Like even the terrain that I'm doing is, probably could use one or two more pieces, and I may supplement it with that. But for the most part, a good set of terrain is not cheap
Right.
uh per table, right? And if you're it's gonna start with 60 players, that's gonna be 30 tables worth of terrain. If you're buying it with GW stuff, perish the thought. If you're looking at like $350 to $400 a table just to get it even reasonable.
Yeah, one of the comments from Pete Dunn is that to forgo prizes, but I would guesstimate for a 150 person event, the prizes actually is a fairly small percentage of the cost. Like it's not insignificant, but it's not like all of a sudden if you don't have prizes, it's like, it's just a big windfall, right?
So yeah, foregoing prizes only works if you're hitting your break-even point. So that's why, like I said, as I'm budgeting for like a 60% fill, And if I go over that, that's great. Now I've got money for prizes. But like, to be honest, the hardest part is trying to um, set that magic number of a reasonable threshold that you're going to hit so that you're not taking money out of pocket.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough
It's a major danger.
it's a tough, I guess, problem, and I just hope, hopefully, we brought a little bit of awareness to it. Hopefully next time players, go to pay for that event, they're not balking at the cost. I know for me personally, like the tournament ticket is actually the least expensive part of the whole trip for me because there's usually travel involved, especially because we're in Vancouver. So realistically, outside of Wet Coast, every tournament we go in, we're staying in a hotel. We're driving minimum of 3 hours, whether it's to the island, to Kamloops, Kelowna, to Bellevue, right? 3 to 4 hours. You got a hotel stay, you got meals. Those are just for the Pacific Northwest. But if I'm going to say Nova or any of the other events, I'm flying in a plane or out in Toronto, we're talking $400 to $500. So for tournaments in general, like my 2019 season, tournament season, I think I went to like 26 events. I probably spent, and some of them I got away with like, using miles, but I probably spent, 10 grand easily over the course of the year just on like tournament travel. And I didn't win 10 grand in prizes and I didn't get 10 grand in stuff back. Like I definitely lost money going to all those events. And if I just wanted stuff, prizes, I should have just saved my money, stayed at home and bought stuff with that 10 grand.
Yeah, no, totally. And I know you're like me, where the ticket cost probably isn't even matching half of what your liquor budget is for the weekend either. So
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that. So Frosty Forge asks in chat, he says, how much did your train cost go up switching from 8th to ninth? He went from 20-ish tables in 8th to about 14 in ninth. So I can imagine at your scale, it's pretty hefty. So he's saying that basically the same amount of terrain that he had in 8th edition only covered around 75% of the tables for ninth edition. So have you noticed? Now I know we haven't actually, I think, ran a ninth edition event yet because we had COVID basically
we
right
have
when
not.
ninth edition dropped. So we
But I
haven't.
do, but I did have my train sets and I did lay them out and kind of see stuff. So it's a doubly bad thing. So like there's a lot of magic boxes in my current terrain sets. And most of those are pretty useless in the new edition in many different ways. So I would say I probably lost even more than that. So like where I had about 40 tables worth of terrain, and then I would borrow about 10 tables worth. I probably am down to about 20 viable tables at the moment. But that's before I basically have now got um, like 20-ish of the new sets built. So I'm back up on par, but it was a lot of work to do that. Like each of the building sets not even including the assembly, because I farmed that out to other people to do, is about 3 to 4 hours of my time.
Right. Dreadlord7476 asks that have you found, and I kind of know the answer to this because I know most of the BC players, but have you found that early bird ticket sales have a large impact, or does everyone still panic buy their tickets 2 weeks out?
People tend to buy the tickets. Well, okay, so the last couple events, they sold out nice and quickly. But before that, man, I'll tell you, as a guy who's booking a hotel and is on the hook for thousands and thousands of dollars, the amount of stress that you're putting on a TO by buying those tickets last minute, please don't buy your tickets early. Give that TO the peace of mind knowing that he's not going to be losing thousands of dollars.
You heard that here first, folks. Make sure you buy your tickets early and buy multiples and maybe even buy like 5 for yourself. No, don't do that. All
No,
right.
don't do that. But
All right, Dan. Any kind of closing thoughts on the subject? Anything you want to add? And I hope players out there are hoping kind of maybe understanding a little bit more of the cost, not just in money but in time that TOs. Make sure to thank your TOs guys because they like. I know I always try to thank Dan. It's a thankless job, and as he mentioned, players basically complain nonstop about just about everything that you do. Although it is fun for some people, it's not always enjoyable, right? And so make sure you're thanking your TOs. Um, a lot, buying them beers for sure. But yeah, Dan, any kind of final thoughts on the subject?
No, so for me, it's just that it's a labor of love. I'm never ever going to get rich doing it. It's funny because I was listening to a podcast on Frontline where they were talking about becoming a full time.
Content creator?
Uh, yeah, yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you, there's much more money in content creation than there is actually in running tournaments. So, and I'm sure Reese would agree with that. So, um, yeah, it's just definitely give them some slack. Uh, it's a lot of work, a lot of work.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I always enjoy the final result. So I'm always really stressed the week before the event starts. But like seeing people's, how much joy they have on their faces when they're leaving the venue on Sundays is always the payoff.
To be fair, my face is usually like, and our group's face is usually just like debilitated from the hangovers. So it's not, I wouldn't call it joy. All right, guys, that's going to be it for the episode. If you guys are enjoying the content, please make sure to hit the thumbs up on the video. Leave a comment below if you guys are watching this in the future and you haven't been watching it live. As always, the podcast and the show is available on all of your regular podcast apps, Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search for the Best Overall Show on those platforms. I am Jim Vessel. I've been talking to Dan Miner. And if you guys are interested, make sure to check out minercreations.com. And we'll also be putting information on Cruisehammer in the show notes as well. So make sure to check those out. Thanks everyone for listening, and I will talk to you guys soon.